Welcome back, folks, to another show, another episode of Hail Hydra. Are you ready, Mav?
I am. I feel weird saying it, though.
Well,
Hail Hydra.
It is a little weird, because if you don't pay attention, they'll probably be like, hey, I knew it. These guys are selling out. As a matter of fact, next time when we meet each other, I want you to, when we finally meet each other, when we're supposed to hang out, I want you to whisper in my ear, Hydra. You know what I mean? So just to make it fully immersed right now.
Gotta meet you on an elevator.
Indeed. Yeah, well, this is going to be a good episode that we have today, and I don't want to spend too much time babbling on and joking around, because there's a lot of information we want to get to. The last episode, we talked about ideological subversion, and what better way to start this series if not by talking about the first subversion, the oldest subversion in the book, right? The oldest subversion in the Bible, which is the Edenic story, though, the fall that happened in Eden. So let's get into that. Today we have a really good guest. So if you like what we're doing and you want to support what we're doing, you can go to viretheftradio.com. There's a support page over there, and you can support us there. I'm going to open up new ways to support. Mav over there has been doing a lot of research on the best ways to support the show. If you want to support us in any other way, you can DM us, and we can provide you with a lot of things. I got a lot of little knickknacks, books signed by the authors, and a lot of things coming soon as well. So stay tuned, folks. But Mav, do you have anything else that you'd like to say before we get into this? We're not going to waste any time. Let's go right in there, bro.
I'm ready. Let's do it.
All right, let's do it. Here we go. Okay, folks, welcome back. Okay, Mav, on the show today, and I know this is your first time meeting him in virtual reality, we got Ali Siadatan from Think Again Productions, founder of Think Again Productions, and my first encounter with him was actually UFOs, Angels, and Gods, and it was a great documentary that honestly was way ahead of its time, and if you kind of lean towards that Billy Carson forbidden knowledge stuff, if you kind of lean towards the Von Däniken stuff, if you kind of lean towards panspermia and things like that, well, think again, okay? How about that? Go to thinkagain.com and you'll see that you got a lot to learn, buddy, and I mean this in a nice way, but it'll thoroughly debunk all of that good stuff. So it's good content for especially Christians who might have very deep and meaningful questions that they don't know, they can't ask their pastor, they can't ask their everyday, maybe evangelical clergy. That's definitely the information there. So without further ado, welcome back to the show. Ali, how you doing?
Good, great. Thank you guys for having me back. Glad to be here.
Indeed. The last show we did was actually about Nephilim and martial arts, and it was actually a very good episode. It was a hit. It was interesting because the people who listened to it were already veterans into the research that we do, this kind of show, and it just kind of blew up. And they were like, "Whoa, I never really thought of that before. That's interesting." And it's funny. It's just one of those things where we might know a lot, but just one little thought. Like that's why I like the name of your website. You think again a little bit, and you're like, "Oh, wait a minute. There's more to the story." So that being said, I mean, I know you have a wealth of knowledge. And thanks for making the time to come back. How have you been, Ali?
Oh, very good. And, going through the seasons of life, but wonderful, yes.
Indeed. So I reached out to you and I said, hey, we're doing a series called Hail Hydra. Can you contribute to this thing? Because we know that definitely now more obvious, all the things that used to be conspiracy are kind of just, oh, that's a matter of fact. Like, it's happening. The phrase New World Order used to be such a Oh, nah, that's no, that's a conspiracy. That's like definitely a conspiracy. Calm down. And now it's thrown out there like candy. It's like someone hit the pinata and it's just poof everywhere. And
Right.
I'm Mexican, so I make that reference. You know what I'm saying? But so yeah, I see it thrown out all the time, and on TV, we just talked about it. We see, especially during this whole thing with COVID, it was like this is the beginning of a new world order. This is this. I mean, it's very overt now, and I figured that we can have you talk about this, but from an ancient perspective, from the oldest story. Sorry, choked a little bit there. The oldest story in which this started to happen long time ago in the book of Eden. I mean, in the book of Genesis, sorry, in the Garden of Eden. So, hey, Ali, you have all this information, and I know you can open it up in a way where it's very comprehensible. So, where do you want to start? Let's set this up, and it's going to get a little weird, and I like weird because definitely there's some interesting connections with Nephilim and different things like that, bloodlines. Oh yeah, it's good stuff, and that's what we like here at Fire Theft Radio.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me kind of set up the 30,000 feet perspective. Now, the overarching perspective, starting from the ancient times, from the Garden of Eden, like you said, and kind of how is it that this structure has been put over the nations and over history, and then we'll look at what was downloaded exactly, into the countries, and how the world order was created to start with, and then prophetically, where are we in all of that? So basically, what we see in the Garden of Eden, the conversation between Satan and Eve, is that Satan asks Eve about this particular, tree, and when Eve repeats God's commandment that you're not supposed to eat it or you're going to die, he negates that commandment. He gives a commandment of his own. You shall surely not die, he says, which is a lie, but it is a very specific lie. It reverses the commandment of God, and it issues his own commandment. You will become like one of the gods, knowing good and evil. And later, the Lord, reflecting on what happened, says, man has become like one of us. So who is this us? Now, what we discovered in the documentary you mentioned, UFOs, Angels, and Gods, the word gods, in 2006, when we released that, the research leading into that, I did a search for the word gods. In 2000, 2001, I had access to a new software called eSword that allowed me to search the entire Bible, any word I wanted to. And I discovered, close to 1,000 references to the word gods. Actually, I have those printouts right here. I've always kept them. And when I sat down and read them, I realized that the Bible speaks of the gods of the nations as though they are real beings. And I looked into the Hebrew, and the word was Elohim. And there are passages that even identify them as devils and demons, such as Deuteronomy 32 in the Old Testament, that Paul talks about in the New Testament. So when I realized that the Bible actually talks about these beings that are, behind the nations, the spiritual forces that are behind the nations as real beings, I had to ask myself, well, where does this come from? How did this happen? And I realized that, it's a long story that it would take us away from really the bulk of what I want to say. So basically, there was a teacher that I was in contact with. His name was Chuck Missler, and he used to say that there's a passage in Deuteronomy 32, verse 8 and 9, in the Greek translation of the Old Testament called the Septuagint, a very important Bible that existed nearly 300 years before the time of Christ, in the libraries of Alexandria. There, Deuteronomy 32, verse 8 and 9 says that when God divided the nations, that's the clans, the different tribes, at the Tower of Babel, he then divided them according to the number of the sons of God. He set their boundaries according to the number of sons of God, but Jacob he took for himself. So there was a spiritual division where behind the nations were these beings called the sons of God, who are the fathers of the Nephilim, who are the fathers of these hybrids, which is an idiom for fallen angels, like in a way that the passages that we're looking at, 1/3 of them have gone, with Satan in this cosmic tale that I'm going to open up for you. And Jacob, God, chooses Jacob, and so that was a spiritual division. So then, going back to this text, now with my discovery of this mystery of the word Elohim, applying both to the God of Israel, but also to the gods of the nations, and understanding that these beings were real, that the Bible talks about these gods and says that, admonishes them to worship God, chastises them, judges them, like the gods of Egypt that are judged at the Exodus, and presents the name of God as one of them, the God of gods. So, and I thought, okay, if God is one of, the leader of these guys, they can't be mythological beings. And now with this idea that, okay, wait, there was a spiritual division, right? So as I started to look into these relationship of these beings and the world, I saw that there was a lot of connections. One of it has to do with rulership. In the temptations of Christ, Satan says to Jesus that dominion over all the kingdoms of the world have been given to me, and I will give them to whomever I will. So this dominion over all the kingdoms of the world has been given to me, Satan says to Jesus.
Now,
and
I'm just wondering if I can step in real quick. What exactly happened in Eden that was kind of taken over or subverted? Because I feel like God gave Adam and Eve a specific job, right? Like a specific thing. And then that was taken over by, I would call it more now, this fallen being or the serpent being. I don't know if you agree with me, Ollie, but I'm not sure if it was exactly the Lucifer or Satan that we think in traditionally, and all that was just the Lucifer that we know. But definitely a being in rebellion to God. What is it that that entity was trying to take from Adam and Eve that was originally the birthright from Adam and Eve?
Yeah. It seems that Adam was made to be the image bearer of God, meaning that in this universe, the destiny of Adam was to bring God's instructions to the creation. And we just got here, but apparently it's a very populated place, the heavens and the earth. Exactly what the structure of this universe is and where God exists in the temple at the heart of time and space, we don't know. But we do know that we have a destiny, that Adam had a destiny that has been restored through Christ. That's the idea, to be this image bearer, and as Paul says, to judge the angels, which means to govern them as servant leaders, to be the king's priesthood and bring, ultimately we're going to be in the heavenly Jerusalem, where we're going to have a very intimate connection to God, great intimacy. And we're going to see God face to face, and be these immortal beings that live eons, that's ages of the universe, and bring God's instructions. And so when you look at Isaiah chapter 14, the 5 I wills of Satan's heart are laid bare. And what we see there is that he wants to be worshipped as the first principle of the created order. Essentially, he wanted for himself what God gave Adam. And that is where the rivalry begins. And so he decides to take Adam out by simply saying, look, I just made a suggestion. He's supposed to be the one that brings your commandments to us. Well, let's test it. Let's just make a suggestion. Hey, buddy, why don't you guys do? And so he isolates them, separates them from each other. With a lot of spiritual warfare knowledge in that story, he separates them from each other. He targets Eve, and I think that Adam, once Eve offered it to him, Adam understood this was not the right thing to do. It's not that he had forgotten, but he now had to make a conscious choice. He chose her essentially over God. He was in love, and he was like, "I'm not giving this one up," and so he went for it. It's not that he didn't know that he was supposed to do that. It's that he made a conscious choice, realizing that she's already done it, and so he put himself on the same side of the fence as she was. And so he then took out, and we see the same thing in the book of Job, where it says that Satan came to the presence of God and the sons of God were with him. So we see again Satan in the context of the sons of God. They come to the throne room and God says to Satan, "Where have you been?" He says, "I've been walking to and fro the earth." And then God says, "Well, have you seen my servant Job?" And then Satan says, "Well, you've given him everything." The obvious context of the conversation is, again, look at what he's righteous, etc. He deserves, mankind deserves their place that I've assigned to them in the creation. And Satan once again challenges that and says, "Yes, but that's because you've just given him everything he wants. Obviously, he's going to love you and worship you and be great, but take it all away from him and he'll curse you." And then so Job again is tested as a sample of the human race. Humanity is worthy because look at Job. And so that's kind of a continuation of this theme in Eden, where again Satan challenges man's place in the cosmic order. And because it kind of collides with his place, his ambitions, as stated in Isaiah 14, the 5 I wills of Satan. So from there, we see a story emerge where the story of the human race is born of the interaction of the world of man and angels, the world of man, God, and angels, including the fallen angels. But we didn't know this. We kind of had lost sight of this, even though it's clearly painted for us in the Bible, because we didn't realize the connection of the fallen angels and the gods of the nations.
Yeah, like if we pay attention, especially like even in the Sodom and Gomorrah story, like it was normal business to them to even sexually interact with beings, like that conversation that was being had by what was his name? They were trying to save Lot, right? And then when they saw the angels, they wanted to sleep with them, and they're like, no, they're angelic beings, they're spiritual beings, and they were like, yeah, I know, we want to sleep with them.
Obviously, they were into that,
right?
That's what I thought.
And it was just part of the culture, and that's kind of what I want to get into a little bit, because I guess we forget that the culture aspect, or what was in the mind of the people during the time when these things were happening, right? And I'd like you to point out a big distinction, because I believe your information is great to debunk all of this other stuff, like the Von Daniken stuff, the stuff that where it's more like panspermia and things like that, because it's great information. Now, one thing, what would you say to a person, and this is a question, I guess, what would you say to a person that says, well, we have these stories that are similar where there's a being came, gave knowledge, and all these stories around the world, for some reason, they're like these serpent beings. You got Peru, you got Mexico, all over the place. And we got serpent being in Egypt. We got them in the Bible, of course. So, and they're always given this knowledge, right? And then if you hear like the people who kind of subscribe to the Anunnaki thing, they're like, well, they gave knowledge, and they made humans to create a slave class so that we can serve these beings. Now, what is the fundamental difference between all of these other stories, and even though there's similarities to the biblical stories, and with the biblical story, I think people don't see that, because I always hear people talk about these other ones, and they say, see, it's like the Bible. But I'm like, well, you're only talking about the things that line up with your story, but not the actual fundamental differences. So if you can point some of those out.
Okay, so they say that what determines a text without context is a pretext. So it's like, yes, you're right, there's similarities, but actually once you plug it into the larger framework, then the meaning comes out. So basically, we presented this, the gods of the ancient world and this ancient astronaut idea, that aliens have been here in the past. We present the UFO phenomenon as the evidence of the world of God and angels in the universe. So this is one of the ways that the kingdom of heaven is manifesting in the universe. And the Bible then reveals to us that the nations were given into the hands of the fallen angels, who presented themselves as gods, and God chose Jacob. And so now that clarified everything. So all of these ideas of these guys having connections with the nations, who they are ultimately behind the mask of the gods is not that they're ancient aliens, but they're actually fallen angels, because this is the history of Earth is part of a larger cosmic tale that the Bible then describes. And so now we knew who these guys were, and we could follow them from the ancient world into the 20th century, and the same ideas of creating hybrids, creating worldview for people. All of these ideas continue in the modern era from these fallen angels who now are presenting themselves as modern day gods or aliens. But to come back to your point as to the creation of hybrids and all of that, basically, what was it that these guys did? And this is the birth of the world order. They essentially, first of all, communicated knowledge of worldview. There was at the heart of the knowledge they gave mankind, there was always a code of religion in which the person would now have a worldview, through which a person would have a worldview and would find a way to worship this entity and unite with it. And then they chose a representative who was a priest and a king, and they built these temples called ziggurats. And this is how the world was born. See, people who are anthropologists, they say urbanization. When we think of urbanization in our modern minds, we think, oh, you leave the farm and you move to the city.
Right.
That's not actually what urbanization is. The way that anthropologists talk about it, they say that in the south of Iraq, Mesopotamia, there was a change in the structure of society suddenly. We went from being organized around clans, around patriarchies, families, like the story of Jacob and his sons, to around these priest kings who represented the gods. That was the birth of the first city-states of the world, and there was 4 of them in the south of Iraq. That is where the world order began. They plugged into human society, they put their own representatives, and then they gave worldview instructions to build temples. We have all of that stuff. And also they created hybrid offsprings. So it was a multifaceted relationship. There's a huge amount of things actually they gave, but I'm focusing on the sector of kingship and the creation of hybrids and the giving of worldview. This 3 is enough for us to establish. There are many other bodies of knowledge that appeared in the south of Iraq: astronomy, mathematics, architecture, kingship, priesthood, the laws of the gods, temple building. All of these things became the foundation of the world that has carried us all the way to today. We are still functioning in these bodies of knowledge, essentially. This even goes back before the flood. If you want to go to the most ancient cradle, we are told that after the story of the Garden of Eden, where Satan also tried to open the door to this perversion of knowledge for Adam and Eve, and invited them into things they weren't ready for. He not only reverses the commandment of God, but opens the door to this knowledge. We see that in Genesis chapter 6, in the events of history leading to the great flood, that there were 7 fallen angels that gave specific bodies of knowledge. There was Azazel, who taught men to make swords, knives, shields, breastplates, the fabrication of mirrors and workmanship bracelets, ornaments, the use of paint, the beautifying of the eyebrows, the use of stones of very valuable and select kind. Piety increased, fornication multiplied. Amzarak taught all the sorcerers, and the Greek word is pharmakeia, and dividers of roots. Adamaris taught the solutions of pharmakeia. Barkael taught the observers of the stars. Akibel taught signs. Tamiel taught astronomy. And Astradel taught the motion of the moon. So they gave knowledge that we would consider to be science. And so it's important to understand that this idea of perverting the human race wasn't just by sowing in their hybrid offsprings, which became kings, but it was also by giving us knowledge to cloud our thinking and corrupt the world.
Right.
And this is the world order began. They created their own system, and they put their own guys in charge because, like Satan says to Jesus, that God had given him this dominion over the kingdoms of the earth.
Right.
And they set themselves up to be worshipped. Now, some of the more famous kings that they put over us, there's Gilgamesh, a very important king of Uruk from the south of Iraq. We know a lot about him. In fact, his tomb has been discovered. We just haven't dug it up because, there's war in Iraq and they can't go and dig it up. But the guys who discovered the tomb, it says in the book of Gilgamesh, or in the tablet of Gilgamesh, that the gods removed the water from the Euphrates, which was a mighty river. I mean, it's still a big river, but then it was been a bigger river. And then they built in the banks of the Euphrates the tomb of Gilgamesh. And so we've discovered that we just have to dig it up now. They're pretty confident. I spoke with the people, and who they're like, we just have to wait until there's things settled. From there, we have, for instance, King Minos in the island of Crete, which is the cradle of Western civilization. And in the Bible, we have Sihon and Og, two Nephilim kings that are taken down by the sons of Jacob. We have warriors such as Goliath, but we also have Hercules. We have other stories from other countries about these champions, they were called. So they really infiltrated the line of kings. They set up religions which created worldview and laws, the matrices of civilization. And this is how they created the world order. They created this extra structure. They took us out of our tribal and clan-like, structure, and they put us in these empires, Egypt and Mesopotamia, and then they influenced it.
I really wanted to bring that up because first few points I wanted to point out that you're saying that are very important if people didn't catch it. These entities were giving people knowledge they weren't ready for. Humans. That's very important. And then you mentioned how they were giving pretty much science, the knowledge of science, which is still something that's happening today. Scientists are reaching out to occult. They're doing occult things. And I don't think it's any coincidence where they do these mock rituals like at CERN and things like that. And they're getting knowledge. People in Silicon Valley doing these like microdosing together and having these group experiences that these reptilian creatures are giving them information. And it's like it's still happening, and it's been happening. And I just wanted to point that out. The other thing is that you pointed out, and you kind of answered the question organically, is I felt, and we've mentioned this just kind of in passing on the show, that the way cities are set up were really a way to make humans dependent on a system instead of living independently, like you said, where we had a way before where we were just kind of, out there on our own, kind of living off the land, and just, it's a whole different type of living. And cities like, to this day, like Los Angeles, like New York and things like that, make you incredibly dependent on the system. And that's, in my opinion, can be very, very evil and easy to control a mass group of people, which I feel kind of started possibly with these entities creating these types of societies where it kind of forces you to be dependent on whatever it is they dish out. I don't know if you agree with that, Ali.
Yeah. They created a system where they could really completely take over people's minds, especially if you lived in one of these ancient kingdoms.
Right.
They had complete the worldview. You had only like this small tribe of Israel was receiving through the prophets of Israel the words of God, and they were not really always obedient to it. Most of the time they weren't. But regardless, they were carrying even something they themselves didn't fully understand. As no one, completely gets everything that's in the Bible, but basically they were carrying the words of God. And God chose kings over Israel and eventually appointed one who's going to be an eternal king, and the son of David, the son of God, who's going to bring about an eternal kingdom. and temple building. God said this is the architecture, and I realized that these other beings were doing the same thing. They were creating a counterfeit system to what God was creating, and this is what was the world. And so what happened, there are two things now we have to look at in parallel in order to now kind of build it into our time. So there was a connection between the fallen angels and the nations. There was deception starting in the Garden of Eden. There was the creation of hybrids. There was the giving of knowledge and the creation of world order. And then there was this, family that God had put his hand on and through whom he was speaking. But then he comes as one of them. And each time there's these moments of connection between the world of God and man, history changes. So the closest example is the birth of Islam, where you've got this, the moon god, where he speaks to Muhammad and the Islamic civilization is born. But whether it's the story of Moses going up on a mountain or the story of Jesus, God comes to the earth and speaks, each time there's these codes of knowledge handed down, an entire civilization is altered or born. So the Moses comes down, the Hebrew civilization is born. Jesus speaks his words, and the Roman Empire is altered forever. The Code of Hammurabi, which was given to the king of Babylon, creates an algorithm of knowledge for that kingdom. Very important code given by the sun god Apollo. So who were these gods, the fallen angels? Who was the God of Israel, the creator of time and space and all that's in it? That's kind of the general division. They're not equivalent, but the same thing is happening. So when Jesus comes and he does what prophecy had said he would do and becomes this atonement sacrifice for the race of Adam to present him back in the cosmic tale, to restore the place of Adam in this cosmic order, because man has a destiny and the universe, appreciates this destiny that man has been assigned to. As his words come into the Gentile world, starting with Cornelius, what we see is that the toppling of the religious world order that Satan boasted to Jesus about, that he's got dominion over all the kingdoms. This is the time where God begins to free the nations through the Passover lamb, the way that he freed the children of Israel through the Passover lamb from the gods of Egypt centuries before.
That's a good thought. I never thought of that. It's like when Satan tempted him, it's like, look, I've already got a kingdom established, bro. You can just have this. Yours is barely starting, if that, because, we're talking about the spreading of the kingdom of God here. So, it just kind of makes more sense. Like, hey, man, this is already set, bro. I'll just hand it over to you.
Yeah, he's like, look, I have dominion over all these kingdoms. You've been given Israel. If you come to my side and bring Israel with you and incorporate it into what I've had, then you can have both. And now you'll have it all, but you'll have to worship me as God, which is his ambition. He wants the first principle of the created order.
Yeah, so it was almost Satan offering a diplomatic solution.
Yeah, exactly. And he even tried to, when he said, throw yourself down from this mountain.
And then Jesus busted Leonidas, like, oh, see, my knee hurts. I can't kneel, buddy. I can't do that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's right. He's Satan behind me. It's written only worship God. So this whole thing where Satan tries to even tempt him to throw himself down, some have suggested it's because he wanted to see if he could die, because the prophecies had said if he's even going to fall, the angels are going to catch him. So he's like, if I'm going to kill this guy if he doesn't accept my offer. He's making you an offer you can't refuse, basically. He's going to kill you if you don't accept it. And he just wanted to make sure that he could kill him. That's why one of the temptations is let's just, do a dry run of this, jump. He's trying to trick him to show that he's the Messiah because the prophecies apply to him. But the Lord is smart enough and counters that with, it's also written, don't tempt the Lord your God. So he's like, I'm not going to reveal that to you. In fact, God is in command, and he chooses to be crucified on Passover. And so as the spiritual world order changes, once I went to, 10 years ago, I was in Israel. I was invited to go with a group of clergy, and they took us to this place called Caesarea Philippi in the north of Israel, the north of the Sea of Galilee, where there is this giant cliff, and underneath it there's all these cave openings, which, as the pictures show, there's some left, but it's mostly destroyed. But the pictures are there to show you that each one of these cave openings was a temple to a different god. And underneath there was a hole, and this hole was filled with water, and that's where you threw your sacrifice. And when you bound your sacrifice, you prayed to the gods, you threw it there, and if it went down in the ground, it meant your prayer was accepted. If not, it wasn't. And that was called the gates of Hades. That was the name of that hole. So the Lord takes his disciples one day, and they go over this cliff. They stand on top of these pagan temples and over this gate of Hades. And he says to them, "Who do you say I am?" And they give him an answer. Finally, Peter says, "You're the Messiah, the Son of God." And Jesus says, "No one gave you this idea," meaning this was a revelation from God to you. But then he says, "Upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades won't overcome it." So he's literally referring to this change in the world order that's coming because of his kingship, of him going to the throne, the temple at the heart of time and space, and receiving the scepter of rule, and then calling the nations back to himself. Because God had said that in Abraham's seed, all the families of the earth would be blessed. And so as the word goes out to the Greek and Roman world, we see the toppling of all of this. And that's when these guys have to go underground, and the secret societies are formed. At first, they were the bosses. Their religions were official, so they had temples like let's say you look at the story of Antipas, who's martyred in the city of Pergamum, where Satan's throne, as Jesus says, he was put in a brazen bull, a bull of bronze that represented Zeus, and burnt slowly, cooked, because he preached monotheism. And the gods were the backbone of imperial power. That's how the world order was structured. You had the Nephilim bloodlines in the royal families, and you had the fallen angels behind them. And this is the Satan had been given this permission to have this structure in the world. Because remember, we are of the world of God and angels, so our history has to be understood with this connection in place. This is actually how the world was created. There's this extra layer that's a bit unseen, but revealed through Scripture as to the power structure that's over the world system. So at first they try to kill the early believers by accusing them of weakening the emperor by not sacrificing to the gods. The most violent persecution is carried out by Diocletian. There's 10 periods of persecution. He sends a messenger to the oracle of Apollo in Delphi and says, "What should I do with the Christian citizens?" And Apollo says the Christians are the enemies of the gods. And so he says, okay, then he suspends their civil rights, confiscates their Bibles and burns them, and they are to be tortured until they sacrifice to the gods or die. And he carries out this thing.
See, if Christians specifically actually understood when they said that, they meant it like these are the enemies of the gods. And it's like we miss that entirely just because we think, oh, we're just of this other religion, that's why they don't like us specifically. But no. In the mind's eye of the culture, it was like, no, they are literally battling against the gods that we worship.
Yeah. It's like, this is going to sound funny, but when Luke Skywalker reaches for his lightsaber and then he just boom, comes into his hand, something that was left for dead, forsaken, and forgotten in this earth that had an incredible destiny, and Satan was rejoicing, thinking that he can now inject his blood, their own bloodlines, into the human world, create their own hybrids, create a new race, and extend his revolution into the heavens. That's how he had in mind. But then suddenly God sends his son, and somehow we get grafted into him and reactivated spiritually, reborn, resurrected. It's as though God is reaching to the earth and summoning us, kind of like Luke summoning the laser sword, summoning us. And as we are rising, this other force is like, no, and tries to kill and darken and lie and hide the Bible and, corrupt our minds in order to stop us, because we have to make a conscious decision to accept Jesus as the king and give our allegiance to him. This is how we get transferred from the domain of Satan to his domain.
Right.
And if we don't, we die in that world that he already has dominion over. So he has a legal right over the human race, and the Lord in his blood literally purchased us legally and altered the cosmic order. And we have to, through our free will, accept it. And the Holy Spirit was sent out to enlighten us and to quicken our hearts and minds and to give us sight into these mysteries. And that's how the nations, were awakened. And so we see.
Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah.
Just a question to maybe pull some pieces together. So the visions of Daniel and Nebuchadnezzar, Daniel chapter 2, Daniel chapter 7. Daniel chapter 2, you have the statue. End result being when you get to the toes, which I think universally is seen as Rome, the rock not cut by human hands destroys the feet. Whole thing obliterates, right?
Yes.
Rock fills the earth. Daniel 7, you have all of these different beasts, and if you do kind of connect those ideas, you see the pattern. There's four kingdoms, and then instead of the fourth one, the last one being frail and destroyed, it describes it as this really ferocious beast.
Right.
So you could telescope that out to Revelation to see this is the last kingdom there.
Right.
So my question is this was the plan, and then here comes the church, smashes into Rome. Now all of these kingdoms go underground. Is Daniel 7 talking about, hey, we're going to do the plan, but we're going to do it right this time, which is why you see such a massive theme of you have to take out the followers of Yahweh this time. You have to take out the followers of Jesus, or this isn't going to work. Do you see that as we're going to pivot on the original plan that we had and we're going to do it differently?
Well, that's a great question. So the last conversation that Jesus has with his disciples as he's about to ascend to God, they say to him, are you going to establish the kingdom of Israel now? Meaning, are you going to defeat the Romans, be this messianic king, and rule from the city of Jerusalem? He actually quotes Daniel 2, and he says, it's not given to you to know the times and seasons that God has set up for such things, the fall and rise of kingdoms. You stay in Jerusalem until power is given to you on high. He doesn't say he's not going to do it. He just says, this is not the time for that. God knows the time. And he's already said that he didn't know when the time was. When he goes to the Lord gives him more information about this moment of history where we're going to see the altering of the age of empire to the kingdom of Christ, the end of one age of history and the birth of the other. God gives him more information. So when he then sends an angel to the island of Patmos, and the revelation that he gives John, the word revelation, apocalypsis, appears 5 times in Daniel chapter 2, which the book of Revelation is based on a recall system. It recalls different books of the Bible by giving us simply a sentence, a word from it. And in order to understand what the book of Revelation is about to expand on, we need to go back and see what was the original context of this term. So the book of Revelation, the title, Apocalypsis, in the Revelation chapter 1, verse 1, there are many, many, many words in that one verse that point us to Daniel chapter 2, which means that this book is the continuation of the question that the disciples asked of Jesus as he was leaving the earth. And the Lord is saying, I'm going to now reflect on the story of empire and the birth of kingdom. And I'm going to do it like I did with the dream of the king, in the language of dreams. But it's going to be about the real world. So there's kind of a climactic moment where God says, okay, I'm going to put this on pause, because Paul says there was a mystery hidden from ages past from Satan, which is that the Gentile nations would be invited to join Israel in this kingdom. And that is the period of history we've entered into, where the king is being inaugurated. and the families of the earth are being blessed in the seed of Abraham. And so Israel is partly blinded, so the nations can have part sight. So some people from the nations given sight. Israel is put in exile the way that Jesus is in exile, in the sense that they leave. And in this way, God goes into the world, right, in that sense, through the Holy Spirit. But then there's a moment in time where it all comes back together, where, as Paul says, there's a number of people that must receive information and become members of this kingdom. Once that number is completed, the fullness of the Gentiles has come in. Then the blindness is removed from Israel, and the events of history that lead to the birth of this messianic kingdom, because right now we're in the messianic age, are going to now begin to take shape on the stage of history. So as far as the dream of Nebuchadnezzar is concerned, which is very interesting, as far as this world order that we're talking about, so the prophets of Israel speak of the hope and vision that God has for the human race, to restore it, redeem it, to make it eternal. We enter into fellowship with the living God forever, and we have this incredible destiny. We continue to be curious. We continue to be explorers, but we live in a utopia, basically. But the book of Daniel is the only book of the prophets. That's why it's not in the prophets. Like in the Hebrew canon, the prophets are on one side, the book of Daniel is in a completely different section, because it's the only book, and it's not written in Hebrew, in Aramaic, most of it, the language of international relations and the language of empire at the time of Daniel, because it's the only book that actually doesn't talk about the history of Israel, but about the history and story and future of imperial world order. It's what separates the book of Daniel from the other prophets that talk about the hope and vision and dreams that God has for Israel and the nations now. So there's a separation. So if we now go into the world order, on one side we see this, the Spirit pouring into the world and the world changing. On the other side, we have this world orders, and God focuses on, he brings four to our attention, like you mentioned, in the statute and in the beast visions of Daniel 7, which are equivalents. And these four, they are part of, so there's four of them. Yes, Babylon, then there's Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome. And Rome continues to prosper. Western Rome scatters into different pieces, and you have, the Charlemagne's Holy Roman Empire that comes out. We have Portugal and Spain that have imperial moments. We have France under Napoleon, the British. And finally, the scepter of the eagle gets transferred to the District of Columbia. In the East, the Rome goes to Constantinople, and when Constantinople in 1453 falls to the armies of the Ottomans, the royal family moves to Moscow, and the Romanov family, the leaders of Moscow, say, okay, we are now the custodians of Eastern Christianity, and they adopt the title of Caesar, or as they like to say it, Tsar. And now the rule of the Tsars of the Caesar, and so they adopt the double-headed eagle of Byzantium, which is on the shield of Russia, and Eastern Rome then goes to Moscow. So from Moscow to DC, through the European capitals and into the rest of the colonies, this becomes the new modern continuation and manifestation of Rome. And so the architecture of the capital and everything is to reflect the Roman temple. You can go read it. Thomas Jefferson is talking about his intention of building everything according to a Roman temple, the Senate, and all of that. And so this is kind of becomes the new Rome, but it gets scattered into different heads, into different pieces. And so we continue to be in the Fourth Empire, and the Holy Spirit pours into the world and puts the ambitions of this one world government on pause, even though the different heads have moments they each try to create a kingdom and empire. It never comes to that fullness. But the Bible says, like you said in the book of Revelation, that God will allow one final empire to emerge. And there are 7 heads, that the dragon has, which is, the symbol of the mastermind is behind this angelic mastermind, the seven heads. So what are
Right.
the seven heads? And this is one common way to look at it. You have the four, in a statue, but you also have two before. So you've got Egypt. Once God puts his hand on Abraham, there is the battle of 10 kings, and some of those kings are Nephilim. They try to kill Abraham. And then God, Egypt comes and enslaves them. So you have the gods of Egypt. Once God reveals his plan, the enemy makes adjustments. Then from Egypt, you have Assyria. So you have the two first forces that push against the messianic line and try to destroy it. Then you have Babylon, Medo-Persia. So that's 4, Greece, and Rome, and now we're in 6. So there's the 7th head left. There's one more empire, and you could even see that the kingdom of clay and metal, the 10 toes, you could even see that in a way as a 5th division in the statue itself, even though it's a continuation of the 4th one. But you can also see that 7th one is already penciled into the statue. That is the one that's ahead of us. And so what we see starting in the 19th century, to your point, Chuck, that there's this huge amount of information that suddenly pours into the human world, and the Industrial Revolution kicks off. And we are now going into the 4th phase of the Industrial Revolution. And this also involves the whole idea of space, rockets. And, this occult knowledge that you're talking about, how people... If you look at Jack Parson, the father of modern day rockets, he was in California at Devil's Gate, where the Jet Propulsion Laboratory is now built, because he created that, doing these occult experiments, because he was a student of Aleister Crowley. And he had a buddy, L. Ron Hubbard, who created Scientology. And, they lived in this great house because, Jack Parsons built a company. They were selling rockets to the army. He became wealthy. He bought this mansion, and they were part of this, cult and they were the students of Crowley, and they were doing this thing called the Babylon rituals.
Yeah.
Sorry,
it was called Babylon Working. Yeah,
Babylon Working. Yeah, and so they were trying to summon this, entity, but Bab actually means gate. That's the word Babylon. The city of Babylon means the gate of the gods. Eloni means gods. The name of Babylon is Babyloni, which means the gateway to the gods. It was, seen as a gate. So the Bab actually means gate. And they do these rituals. He says that it was during these rituals that the idea of the solid rocket fuel that allowed rockets to go up into space came to him. And there, right shortly after, this was 1946, and shortly after 1947, we have the, rebirth or the beginning of this UFO phenomenon, which, if we are to follow the blueprint of the Bible's, indications to us about reality, Jesus said that the end of this age would be like the days of Noah. And the days of Noah were the days of the mass connection of the sons of God. So the UFO phenomenon would then be like the sons of God. And what do? They create hybrids. The way that the sons of God before the flood created hybrids. That's what the UFO phenomenon researchers like Johnny Mack, head of psychiatry at Harvard, or and David Jacobs from Temple University, who I've met many times and interviewed extensively, these guys are saying, yeah, the creation of hybrids is at the heart of the UFO phenomenon. That's where the research takes people. So we see that these are not aliens. They've never been aliens, because we are not in the universe, from a secular point of view. We are in the heavens and on the earth. And so we're in a completely different reality than the one that would lead to aliens, modern or ancient. We're in a different story. That's like the wrong movie. We're in a different movie. The actual true nature of reality. And that we've been deceived. So technology suddenly gets poured back into the human world. Hybrids reappear on the stage of history. And it's probably because they're getting us ready for the great climactic cosmic war, the famous Battle of Armageddon. They're giving us the technology, but they're also getting ready to establish empire. Like you were saying with COVID, we saw how the world changed, and now we're seeing AI, and we're seeing security systems like social credit in China. The whole idea of having vaccination passes on your phone, digital ID, digital currency. And we now need more crises, whether the environment is seen as a coming crisis, whether there's going to be a global economic collapse, next year, as we're already seeing, many emerging countries, emerging economies suffer because the US dollar is so high value, and they have to buy their gas in US dollars, and the interest rate, continues to rise, so they have to pay their debt to the World Bank, the debt they have to America, they have to pay it at a much higher interest rate. And this is basically collapsing many of the economies in the world right now. Sri Lanka was the first one to go, but we already see the Prime Minister of Italy has just resigned. The Prime Minister of another one of these, I think it was one of the Nordic countries, resigned recently. The Prime Minister, or the ex-Prime Minister of Japan, was just killed. So we're seeing kind of the beginnings of the world system collapsing, perhaps, as the economy collapses. And this will continue to allow these guys to build from its ashes a new world order, in which, unfortunately or fortunately, but whatever, America may no longer be at the helm of the world order. Right now, since World War II, we entered into the American world order, where when you organize the nations in a hierarchy, America is on top. If this does happen and we have a global economic collapse and the American economy also gets weakened, then America may become now need a coalition of partners to maintain its power. And so we start to see the idea of the 10 toes taking shape, where now there's not one power that is so ahead of everybody else that it doesn't need the 9 other toes. Now it needs the 9 other toes. And so we now see more of a, and I suspect as China becomes more powerful economically, it will push Russia perhaps back into the European and Western sphere, and the West closer to Russia. I think that the eagles will reunite to form the final Roman Empire from Moscow to DC. This is only a theory. I'm just watching it. But I think that makes sense to me, if this is really what the Roman Empire's, the symbol, the eagle, the bull, all of these symbols of Zeus, which we still continue to see. So we'll see how it unfolds. But what's interesting about these 10 kings is that it says, in the context of the last empire of clay and marrow, it says, and the King James actually has this one correct, says that they will mingle their seed with the seed of man. It's in Daniel chapter 2, verse 42, around there. They will mingle their seed with the seed of man. And the they is in Hebrew, is the plural masculine pronoun, which means like the he's. And then it says it is in the days of these 10 kings, or it doesn't say the thing is, in the days of these kings, that God will establish his kingdom. So we are to expect 10 Nephilim kings. And who's at the helm of it? Well, going back to Garden of Eden, when God says, I'll put enmity between the seed of the serpent and the seed of the woman. Well, we know the seed of the woman is the Lord, the virgin birth. But the seed of the serpent, well, you look at the parable of the wheat and tares, where it's one of the parables that the Lord actually opened up in plain language, because they asked him inside of closed doors, what did you mean by that? And he said that God planted his seed in the garden, and while he was sleeping, whatever that means, maybe it was the Sabbath day, the devil came and planted his seed in the garden. So there were 2 seeds, and these seeds are not just knowledge, like God's laws and the enemy's laws, like in the Garden of Eden. We already see a small version of this. Eve receives God's laws, Satan issues his own commandments, and as Adam and Eve have kids, Satan expands the strategy to the nations by creating these religious structures and then infiltrating it with his own offsprings. So this becomes it's a very real, literal thing. It's a combination of all of these things. The seed of the serpent is a combination of both the hybrids and also the knowledge they pour in the world. And God, of course, has spiritual children. I mean, Adam was made in the image of God, and then we are, resurrected in the image of the resurrected Christ, the second Adam. So God has spiritual children, and God has given his knowledge. And so the two um, um, worlds are so intertwined that Jesus compares it to wheat and tares that wrap around each other. And tares look exactly like wheat until they flower at the end. And in fact, in the Hebrew mind, tares was genetically modified wheat. So there's this idea of genetic modification,
Ooh.
of the original thing. And so this parable of wheat and tares, if we're to understand this, is talking about the infiltration of the enemy, the Nephilim bloodline, and the knowledge that came with it that corrupted the world, like the ones given before the flood and after the flood, into the 20th century, leading to all of this incredible, advancement. If this is something a parable is talking about, that then it tells us that this commingling goes all the way to the second coming, when the Lord will send his angels to, take the wheat out and burn them and harvest the wheat. So the tares are removed. So
I'd like to bring something up before you move on. Just because I think it's important and it ties together. I've had Doug Riggs on, the late Doug Riggs, passed away recently. And he said he used to do, what was it called? Free the minds of people who were part of satanic ritual abuse. And he had a specific word for it, and I forgot the word, but he would pretty much try and piece together their mind again because they were part of these ritual abuses. And he would do that with very high-profile elite people. One of them was a Rothschild, and what he said that she brought up, and her name escapes me right now, but even if this weren't physically true, it's important to point out that ideologically it's in the minds of the elite. So I want to bring this up. She said that there was, at the bottom of Caesar Palace in Vegas, like a elevator that can take you down, kind of like deeper down, like into a dumb, like deep underground military base. And there was a train that can take you deep into Nevada, really, really fast. So it was one of those like electromagnetic trains, and that they would take her there, and she had clearance to go there. And there was like one of these dumbs. She would get access to it and go inside, and inside there was a project happening called the Nephilim Project. And in that they were creating kind of clones or copies of people, or using people already, and trying to engineer them to be like Nephilim and then reintroduce them into society. Now, Doug Riggs brought this up and said, hey, this could be an imagination or something seared into her brain, part of the ritual, because they do stuff like that. But it also could be a reality. And the thing that I just want to bring up, like, even if it wasn't physically true, it's in the minds of the elite. Like, they believe this stuff. They acknowledge the stuff that we're talking about from a biblical perspective. They absolutely believe in it, so much so that it is ritualistically seared into their brain. So it's important to know that they're thinking about these things. We're not just making it up.
Yeah, totally. Their CEOs and people in power sometimes say that entities appeared to them in there at night and gave them ideas, that move the company forward. There's lots of even the creation of fiber optic cables. The guy who created it, I remember watching a documentary, and he was close to his death, and he said, "Now that I'm dying, I just want to say that this is what happened. These entities came to me and they gave me the idea, and I was told never to talk about it or they'd kill me. And now I'm dying, so I just want everyone to know." And I was watching this like shocked. This connection between even the Masons, their Lord Bacon, very important Masons. The Masons believe that their top guys get visitations from the unknowables. That's what they call them, the unknowables. And they receive these visitations. And then the world religions, like whether it's Islam or, speaking to Muhammad, or of course, people are people everywhere, but we're just talking about ideas and trying to decipher the great mystery of life here. Or the Queen of Heaven, who is a very ancient fallen angel who has a lot of power in the Catholic Church. and of course we see so much coming out of the Vatican that doesn't sound a lot like the Bible for people who read the Bible. The Jesuit movement, black masses,
Fatima, the visions of
Fatima.
Fatima.
Yeah, the Queen of Heaven appears everywhere and continues to entice people to worship her. So the connection between these entities and us is weakened in the age of the Holy Spirit, but continues to be still very much there in the world before the Holy Spirit, before the time of Christ. This was very open. I mean, the communication was very loud and clear. And when you went, like, some guy would go to the altar of Zeus and sacrifice, like the priest of Zeus, and then Zeus was haunt him, and then he would receive messages. It was very much out in the open. But the Lord altered this spiritual landscape. But then at the end of the age, He says He's going to purge the earth, and so He's going to allow all the stuff to come to the surface, because it's going to be the time of purging or judgment, and He's going to free us. The story of the Exodus, which is the story of these people who are the people of God, but they're enslaved to the gods of Egypt and to their representative, the Pharaoh, and they are freed through the gateway of the Passover lamb, whose blood they put on the doorposts, to which they leave and enter into the resurrected life and enter into the fellowship of the living God. And these entities, Pharaoh and his gods, are judged. This is also very much the story not only of the first coming, where we're spiritually free, but the second coming, where the earth is physically redeemed. These guys are going to come back to power in a major way. We're going to have, again, Nephilim kings over us. There's going to be the 10 toes. There's going to be also the one who leads them all, the king of the nations. Now, whether this serpent seed can be traced throughout history, or whether it's like, can be seen only just like now in end times, I think it's both, personally. So whether these 10 kings are from the ancient bloodlines of the Nephilim, or whether they are born of the modern reemergence, I don't know. I lean, in the case of these 10 kings, in the direction of historical bloodlines, because so far when I see the modern day Nephilims, I see how much they struggle to learn to be human-like, because this time they're built in a laboratory, so they look like us. They're not tall giants. They walk among us. And so but I see that there's a lot of training they go through to understand what it means to be human, even though they're telepathic, so they can actually extract information out of your mind, and so they learn very quickly. But still, it's not easy to be human. And but these kings, I think they might be from the ancient bloodlines, so they are more human. They've been around, for a long time. Like Goliath had 4 brothers, and these guys, were spreading their seed, and there's many other people like that from the ancient world that was spreading the Nephilim seed. And that's why the Lord, I think, compares it to wheat and tares. And he says to the angels, if you pull them out now, you're actually going to take out mine. You have to wait until the end of the age, when the wheat and tares are separate from each other, which means, to me, this is my interpretation, I think what he's saying is that someone might be destined for my kingdom, but they're not born yet. The guy that you're about to pluck out, and he has a lot of this tares in him, his grandkid is destined for my kingdom. The genes are so intermingled together that if you pull him out, I'll lose the grandkid. So you have to wait until all of the genetic system is expressed. And that's what the resurrected body is about. We have a new body untouched by these, shenanigans.
Yeah.
And so this is where we're headed. The final empire, these Nephilim guys over us. And like in Egypt, we're underneath it, but then God in his heavens armies, he's called the God of heaven's armies, Adonai Tzvaot, the God of heaven's armies.
Question.
Yeah,
question. Have you ever looked at somebody and said, I think he's a Nephilim or something? Because he kind of said that a little bit tongue in cheek. They're among us, and it's hard for them to be human. I'm just wondering, what you mean by that, is since you've seen it's difficult for them to be more like humans. Where, I don't know, man, maybe one of these days I'll actually meet one. Who knows? But people have said that they have met people that look kind of like humans, but they really are just different. There's a lot of accounts of that. and they just feel evil or they feel different. So, can you give us an example?
The feel would be one way to know that if you're kind of used to feeling people like their vibes.
Right. Uh-oh.
Okay. Give me 1 second.
Sure. Perfect timing, huh?
Oh, or it's exactly the right question, Chuck, and they're trying to keep the answer from getting out.
That's what I'm saying. Perfect timing on that alarm situation, whatever happened over there. We'll be right back, folks, and here we go.
Okay, sorry about that. This is new. My house just fire alarm has been going off. It started last night, went off twice, and now this is the third time.
It's because you are with Fire Theft Radio right now. That's what's going on.
Yeah.
Uh-oh. Again.
trying to keep the info from getting out.
Mm-hmm. That's a good question because we're trying to make you guys, the listener, know what's up. See if you ever bump into a Nephilim. Let us know. Send us a DM, and we'll investigate it. Me and Mav will go over there. We'll do some Nephilim hunting.
We'll look around. We'll bring a mic. We'll capture it.
Excuse me, sir. Are you a Nephilim? I knew it.
Like where you fall under their car. Answer the question, sir.
Oh my gosh.
I was actually looking for the book. I have that book from the from the researcher, from the professor. He even mentioned him. But
what researcher?
The UFO researcher.
Oh, got it.
It wasn't Mac. It was the other one. It's terrible. Can't remember his name. I can't find his book. But I put it away. One of the only times I put it away.
Oh, it's all good.
Jacobs. It's interesting just because the title is Walking Among Us. Like, he has the same theory, just coming at it from a completely different side, different angle completely. Not through a theological lens, but through a UFO research lens, finding those connections.
I see.
So he would be following along the same lines
of Walking Among Us.
Well, after he wrote that book, I went and interviewed him. I haven't yet released that interview.
Ooh.
But I met him for 5 hours, and so the basically this is a new kind of development where it's no longer about the creation of hybrids; it's about the integration of hybrids. People who are taken, who are part. I think that the people who are abducted for modern day hybrids to be created from their bloodline, maybe they have the old Nephilim bloodline. They're good candidates for that. And so, because it's bloodlines, children, parents, and kids are abducted intergenerational.
Right. I was going to say that. Like, we just had Jim Wilkinson on, and he said that is like the common denominator. Often, it's like a generational bloodline thing. The people that are getting abducted are having these experiences.
Yeah, and I think that they have past connections to the world of these things, and so they're candidates, and they are then abducted to create hybrids and to train hybrids. But now the latest research is now that the abduction is about helping the hybrids get the driver's licenses, social security numbers, find apartments. So I was giving a lecture in a suburb around where I live here as a conference. And then afterwards, this woman comes up to me and she says, why do you speak negatively about these guys? When I was born in a hospital, there was these lights outside because my family has been connected to them. And where I live in Oshawa, she said, there's these semi divisions like homes, and there's a lot of them that live there, and they say hi to me because they know me. And this guy came and said something to her. He was really tall. He bent like an elastic band. He just bent in half. But she was short. Said something in her ears, and then she said, "I'll be there. I'll be right there." And he left and turned his face. I could never see his face. He was very careful as to not to show me his face. He left, so she said there's a lot of them living in this subdivision where she was living. And this is what, Dr. Jacobs has recorded, is that they live together inside of homes, and often the abductee is taken there to tell them whether it was decorated properly, so that it looks normal. And they sometimes are going to work with these guys to learn about how that works, how does the workforce work. So there's this integration and learning to be human.
Wait a minute. Sorry. You just blew my mind right now, because I always like to talk about this stuff and how the propaganda exists in the movies that we watch all the time, and they tell you what's happening all the time. So we do that often on the show. There's that movie with that kid that played Zuckerberg. What's his name? You know what I'm talking about? He played
the social media,
social network. But anyways, that kid that played that guy, he made another movie with another girl where they got stuck in this cookie cutter housing area that is brand new, and it's called Vivarium. The movie's called Vivarium, and they go there and they can't get out. It's shaped like some sort of thing where they just can't get out, and they're shown a house exactly kind of perfectly, and they get stuck, and they always see the same person, and the person is almost human-like, but they're not, and you don't know what the whole point of the movie is, but they really can't leave, so they're forced to live in this house because they can't escape it. And then at the end of the movie, you find out that it was an alien that takes people into homes, forces them to live there so they can study them, so they can learn to be human-like. And so that way they can live amongst people. And so they weren't able to escape. And by the end of the movie, that same guy that took them there to show them the home that they were going to purchase learned something new, and he writes it down, and then he interacts with more humans. And that's how he keeps becoming more human-like, by interacting with them often. And that was the whole point of the movie.
Yeah, because when Christ comes back, we're told that he's going to resurrect the dead who have believed in him in the last 2,000 years. And then we who are living, we're going to receive a new body, and we're going to form a government and be part of this priesthood of the kings, this royal priesthood. And so these guys are creating an alternative, counterfeit version of this coming. While they have power in this world system, they're creating their own.
It's like a mockery of the incarnation.
Yeah, it's like we were made in the image of God, so it's like they're tapping into that, and then putting their own image, inserting their own image into it, and creating beings in their own image, but mixing it with the bloodline of the one who was made in the image of God,
right?
In order to create a civilization that is theirs. So they've got their leaders, they've got the hybrids, and then they've got the people that love them and believe in them underneath them, and more people like us who are essentially adhering to an enemy kingdom from their point of view. We are going to, I think in the West, eventually as this empire rises, there will be persecution coming, like in the early days of the Roman Empire. We're going essentially full circle.
Right. I was going to say, you brought up a good point, and maybe I'm going to change the subject a little bit, but do you have something, Matt, before I kind of change the subject?
Yeah, the actual question that was asked when the alarms went off, and now we'll see if that's the reason the alarms are going off, is how do you recognize one of these just out in the just out in public? Is that the word?
Yeah, in public. I think they're logical more than emotional. They're not creative like us. They're very logical beings, kind of like Spock. And they would be awkward. They wouldn't feel the way, if someone suddenly falls down in front of them and hurts themselves, they might not necessarily be like, "Oh, what's wrong? Are you okay?" They're more logical than emotional. Beyond that, I would say their energy, because I think they're the ones that are selected to infiltrate look a lot like us. There's a whole process that they go through to select the ones that look like us that I can tell you about if you want to. But basically, they are vibing different. I think we'll feel their energies. John, in his epistle, says you should test every spirit that comes to you. So definitely, if you ask them questions about the Lord, maybe what their responses to that might be something that helps you understand. I do have people that contact me, whether they through email, and they say they're abductees. And after I had this encounter in that conference, this was over the weekend, and then on Tuesday, someone broke into my studio and stole my laptops, and that was very kind of strange. I felt there was a connection, but then that was 2 days later. So I was at the conference actually on Tuesday. On Thursday, they broke into my studio and stole my laptops, and then on Saturday, the door was glued with super glue and little sticks, and no one could get in. I came in. There was a gym downstairs, the martial arts school upstairs, and they had totally locked the door with glue and sticks.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, okay, let me just open the back door, because way back in the lot, I mean, it's a 10,000 square foot building. In the back of the lot, there's a small door that leads only to me. No one knows about that door. I mean, you really have to know the building to know about that door. So I'm like, oh, let me just open the back door and let everyone in so that people can go to the gym, people can go upstairs. When I went back, that door was also glued with glue and sticks. The other doors of the other businesses that are on the lot, like there's a car wash, there's a car rental, mechanic, none of those was. Only the ones leading to me. And this was 2 days after the laptops were stolen, and this was just 2 days after the conference. So they try to keep it under wrap. And I think the fact that I spoke about them and this woman who said, so, there's a reality that she said, oh, they're living in this neighborhood here. There's a reality, but we can move forward against anything unless God commands us. Our job is to preach the good news. And the good news is not just that our souls are saved, but that God has a plan for this planet, that God has a plan for the human race, that God is going to heal the planet itself. He's going to redeem the physical world by removing the empires, by removing these dark powers that are behind it, and by bringing in a utopia where we will continue to exist for ages and ages. We will explore, we will continue to be these curious creatures. And the reason he's doing this is because at the heart of it, there is a love relationship between him and us. And he's adopted us as his children, not as metaphorical children, but as actual children. And even the love that we have for our kids is an echo of the love that he has for us. It's a mild echo. We are kind of like a satellite dish, just capturing a piece of that love and giving it to our kids. The one that he has for us is much more genuine and pure and profound and true. And we are to bask in that love and the hope and vision he has. So this moment in time where this empire rises and is defeated is really a second in the cosmic history. It's an epsilon. And so even though we want to understand it, we don't want to get depressed or lose hope because of the weirdness and the demonic nature of it. We have to place it in the larger context where God is in control, like in the story of Job. He tells Satan what he can do to Job. There are limits to what these guys can do. And the kingdom of God, he's already received the scepter of rule over all the nations as we speak. The authority has been transferred to him. And the presence of God's angels, God's spirit, and God himself is far stronger, on a whole other scale, that, much larger multiple. You could even pronounce like these guys are like sand, so are we compared to God. And so they're cornered, they get a last hooray, but God is in charge even of that. That's why it's prophesied. God is going ahead of us and saying, when you see all these scary things rise, I want you to know that I knew about it beforehand. That's why I told you about it. It's under my control. I'm already telling you what's going to happen at the end. And I'm allowing it because I'm going to actually purge it like a tree that has fruit, and then you cut it down. And so here,
like the tares.
Like the tares. The fruit is evil. Yeah. And once it's manifested, I'm going to remove it. So it's all around he's got the whole world in his hands. And there's a bright future coming. But this is something we should know about, that God spoke about to comfort us so we wouldn't freak out when this thing rises, but also because we have choices to make. His free will is a very important part of this story. We have choices to make, and the choice is, do we choose the King of Kings, or do we choose the King of the Kings of the nations?
Mm-hmm. I've got a really quick follow-up question. You mentioned something about them being very logical and being very robotic almost. That was my word I added. But I've been chasing this idea, and I didn't know where to go with it, but I think you may have provided a path. There seems to have been this like raising up of the autistic, like that idea of that autistic person. When they act like that, they're actually really brilliant and amazing, right? You can go to Big Bang Theory and Sheldon, or you go to some of these other, or Spock's. So is that part of this predictive programming, so that if you see someone like that, instead of saying they're weird, you go, they're brilliant?
Possible, yeah, totally possible.
Definitely.
You'd have more people interacting with them because, oh, we need to help people. This is great. They're wonderful parts of our society, and now hybrids can just kind of waltz around and be interacted with, and to a greater degree, and be accepted to a greater degree.
Yeah, it's possible. I mean, definitely, we see so many social changes happening out of the blue with gender and transhumanism.
Yeah,
where's all this coming from?
Right.
No.
Or even Elon. There was a big deal. Oh, Elon is autistic.
Yeah, Elon.
That was a big deal for a hot second.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is definitely happening. But I have one more question before we kind of get into the info or where they can find you. But I think you're the perfect person to ask about this. And you might disagree with me. Maybe I missed something. But me and Mav were talking about how disclosure just kind of was underwhelming almost. Like they just kind of slipped it in there and then we moved on. And we both felt like, oh, I've been talking too much. My throat's drying up. We both felt like what happened there. And I mean, seeing your documentary UFO Angels and Gods and Age of Deceit 1, 2, and 3 and things like that, it was just, it almost seemed like, oh, disclosure's coming. It was super hyped. And then it just kind of like fell flat. Now it happened though. I'm not diminishing it at all, but what do you think? What are your thoughts on why it happened the way it happened?
I think that in 1947, when Israel became a nation, according to the United Nations, if we go with the perspective that God is actually not done with the biological Israel and that there's a destiny, prophetic destiny, I think the enemy was like, wow, this is the time. The Messiah is about to come. And so they immediately went into, disclosure mode. So the UFO phenomenon appeared. Tens of thousands of people were seeing it. It was official. Everyone could talk about it officially in the United States. If you were in government, the Air Force, people talked about UFOs like it was totally normal. The culture was totally talking about it openly, the way that in Mexico and other places, it always stayed open. But then it didn't happen because God controls the timing. And so it kind of lost steam and went underground with 1971, the Condon report by Professor Condon from Colorado University that said it's all just a myth. There's no reality here. But organizations continue to document it. No longer was it being documented officially, like from 1948 to 68. And it kind of went down underground, but there's a reemergence. And right now, and this has got steam after COVID. We've seen a massive reemergence of, hey, the UFOs are here. It's being actually, the reason there was a CIA report a long time ago that looked into this, saying that if people were told that aliens were here, there'd be mass chaos, and no one would respect the government anymore, right? You'd be like, well, you guys are no longer the big bosses. I'm not paying my taxes anymore. So that's kind of like, what the problem. So the soft disclosure through Hollywood, which began early on with the day the planet stood still, put a poster of it in that documentary because already there was a messaging the day the Earth stood still. There was a messaging in that movie about how the saviors of the world have arrived. And it's like, how could in 1951 people already know what the intention of this new UFO phenomenon even was? Well, it was propaganda. And that continues through Hollywood. And we've got the modern day disclosure phenomenon where the government has joined forces. It's not just coming out of Hollywood. It's also coming from the government, where they're essentially telegraphing to the population that, you're right to believe in these guys. We're looking into it as well. And we even have a budget set aside for it. And yes, even Congress is hearing about it. And this is really encouraging people because I'm a researcher and people come to me and confide all the time without knowing where I stand on all of this. But they people of importance, who are very normal people of important jobs in private, they tell me that they really believe in these UFOs and they believe that the saviors of the world are here. They say things like, they're really going to help us. They're going to stop things from really blowing up. And I'm like, wow, you really believe in this? And in my head, I'm like, wow, this is incredible. This is when I try to
optimistic, always optimistic.
Yeah, I was optimistic. So this whole disclosure is about preparing the culture to receive perhaps the coming great lie, and what that would be.
Mhm.
Starting with the creation of a telescope with Galileo and Newton and these guys who are also Masons and brilliant people, but also Masons. We have a transformation of our worldview. We're no longer in the heavens and on the earth, but we're in the universe. What's the universe? The universe is just something we're exploring. It's a bunch of gases and rocks, and we're trying to piece it together with our own thinking. And as this idea of the universe takes hold of the Western culture, we then see atheism and materialism, the pillars of the secular veil, like that controls the mindset of this part of the world. This is not the world of Islam. This is not the world of Hinduism. This is not the world of Shinto religions. This is the world of secularism. And secularism has different pillars of thought that form it, and it's created by these guys, but it has different pillars of thought. So the story of Darwin becomes the creation myth of the atheist. And so suddenly we now have a universe. We're in the universe. What it is, we don't really know. And now that we have this idea of Darwin, then we extend it into the universe, and we say the same way that we evolved here, they evolved elsewhere. And now the idea of alien is born. But if we're not in the universe, but we're in the heavens and on the earth, and this is the host of the heavens and the host of the earth, there is no such thing as an alien in the Darwinian sense. That's like saying Daffy Duck or Mickey Mouse. It's just a figment of imagination, but it becomes very real for the population that has believed in the secular view of reality. Now we can believe in the concept of aliens, and these fallen angels are rebranding from gods to the people of the ancient world to modern day gods or technological gods or aliens. Come, and the propaganda is come to save us, because that's what Antichristus means, the pseudo-Messiah, instead of the Messiah, a counterfeit Messiah. So everything is a counterfeit. The Lord has royal priests, they create royal priests. The Lord has temples, they create temples. The Lord gives laws, they give laws. The Lord wants to create a new race and a new age of the earth and a new kingdom and a new heaven and new earth. They try to do the same thing. It's all about counterfeit, counterfeit, counterfeit. So here we have this counterfeit idea of we are the saviors of the world. And we're going to help you. There's going to be environmental problems, they keep telling the abductees, and we're going to help you with that. So they might be causing it themselves. Or maybe it's the judgments of God. We read in the book of Revelation that the temperature of the sun is going to go up. So, and the changes of the orbit of the planet would cause all kinds of environmental changes, not so much carbon, but actually orbital changes in the geometry of how the planet orbits around other celestial bodies, especially if the sun were to increase in temperature. These things are huge. But again, these guys would then rebrand the judgments that are coming over the kingdom of the Antichrist as, environmental issues, and so they're going to give us solutions to it. That's what the abductees are told. And I've done a lot of research into this. It would take too much time, but that's a huge element of the whole thing. They're going to give us
but you're
technology.
You're just bringing up what we've been talking about, is that these scientists and people that are considered of importance have been using this kind of ideas like propaganda pretty much, and making propaganda to steer people into a certain direction. Starting, you like you said, our Newton and all those people and Darwin, and it's like there seems to be a connection. If you read the book like Genesis 6 Conspiracy by Gary Wayne, there's this idea that these secret societies have to integrate themselves into what they call the 7 sacred sciences, and so they intermingle with with the arts, they intermingle with the actual scientific, mathematical stuff, anything that can socially engineer people to kind of go into a direction they want you to go, which kind of naturally, how can you spot that out? It will naturally try to phase God out of the equation. It's pretty basic. So that's how you find out that these things are trying to subvert you, because they're trying to take God out of the equation and introduce something else, replace it with another ideology. And that's how you catch it.
I've been on shows with Gary Wayne. So what he takes from the Book of Enoch, there are 7 bodies of knowledge. In these bodies of knowledge that were given to the human race, it's interesting to note that humans were able to actually receive it, which means that we are designed to understand these knowledges. We can break the atom in two. We can decipher the genetic code. What these guys do is they pervert knowledges that are natural and normal and from God for us eventually to understand how God's creation operates. They pervert it to alter reality in the direction of their ambition and their vision and their worldview, and to turn it against God in a perverted way. So when the earth is corrupted, it says in the book of Genesis, it's not just corrupted by the sowing of the seed of the sons of God and the creation of Nephilim. It's corrupted by the sowing of knowledge perversions into the human structure and the altering of reality in our minds. And this continues to this day. And I think the weaponizing of space and the whole rocket, I mean, why is it that it always has the names of Greek gods? The Apollo missions, the Artemis Accords. Why is it that the occult is involved in the creation of rocket fuel, like with Jack Parsons? I was looking this up the other day, that the first object in space was Sputnik. The Russians sent a satellite in space, and I looked up the date on the biblical calendar, and Sputnik was fired up and sent into space on the Day of Atonement, which is also a day of judgment in God's calendar. There's the redeemed and the judged. It has this feeling of Nimrod, reaching into the heavens, trying to build something into the heavens. And these guys have their hands on the rocket fuel. They have their hands on the name of the planets. They're making a claim. Once you understand the gods and the fallen angels are connected, then the name of the planets, the name of the NASA missions, the technology that's given to us to make all these things possible. You mentioned CERN. You look at the opening ritual of how CERN was inaugurated. It's totally occult, the ritual.
Yeah, super pagan. Oh, gosh.
Yeah, it was crazy. And I couldn't believe it. I'm like, what? It's like a double take.
That's what I'm saying. And it's what I'm saying. It's like they're trying to go back, because look, you said earlier, they're trying to go back to what it was like before, where nothing was occult, like hidden. It was just overtly done. And like you said, because they were losing the battle because of the spread of the kingdom of God, they had to go into hiding, into secret societies, and everything was kind of in the background, bubbling up. But now it's
allowing them to come up and have
right. It's so like you said, it seems that it's going full circle, and we're nearing that time where it's just, okay, this is the last kingdom. It's all out in the open. People just nonchalantly accept it as the reality of things, and let's move forward. And I think it's getting very close. So we'll see. I don't know, maybe in our lifetime.
Absolutely, I think in the 21st century for sure. So the sciences and these perverted bodies of knowledge they tie it together to form kind of a solution to the world's problems. We don't need to look to God and his kingdom for the solutions to the world's problem, but these bodies of knowledge, these sciences, they're going to help us prolong our lives, heal the planet, heal ourselves. And so more and more the scientists become like priests, because they're downloading these bodies of fallen angelic knowledge into our world, even though some of them may not realize it. And this is going to increase in magnitude, because the leader of this final kingdom is going to do lying signs and wonders and make fire come from the sky. And I think that's when he's going to make a connection to something greater than himself, which again, the Bible tells us what that greater thing is, because it says that the devil will give him all of his authority and power, the way that he has in previous beast empires, beast kingdoms, the six before it. But here, he's going to make this connection. I think that's when the conversation suddenly turns into the cosmic order, because prophetically it says that he's going to speak against God and against the inhabitants of heaven and against the kingdom of God. Why would a world leader start talking about, religious stuff? Well, if it's all rebranded in the clothing of UFOs, the conversation becomes more palatable for the secular world, at least. So if the bad guys present themselves as good aliens, then it follows logically that they would present God and his heavenly army coming to the earth as bad aliens. There'll be kind of a reversal of characters, like a good cop, bad cop scenario, especially if these chariots, the vehicles that Elijah was taken up in, and were present at Mount Sinai, whether it's the Rechev of the angels, the vehicles of the angels, or the Merkava, which is what carries the Lord, the moving throne of God that Ezekiel has a vision of. And Isaiah says that the Lord will come back with his chariots, or with his Merkava, in Isaiah 66, verse 15. So if in fact the manifestation of the second coming can be perceived as a UFO, invasion, then it becomes easy for these guys to reverse reality and rally the world to war against God, because so many prophecies say that, yet like in Joel and Zechariah, in Revelation, you think, well, how would the world go to war against God? Well, Paul says that there's going to be a great lie. And we conjectured in our 2006 documentary that the lie was this reversal of reality, of God being presented as the coming alien force that gave religion, gave all the bad stuff, while these guys, because if you look at the Masonic kind of thinking, the idea is that Satan was the good guy. He gave knowledge. He wanted to give light and knowledge to humanity.
Right.
But Hebrew God was the bad one. He was like, no, stop it. Or if you look at Nimrod, now we very little about Nimrod in the book of Genesis, but in other writings that have been carried in Jewish tradition, it says that Nimrod gathered the world against God by saying, look, God drowned our ancestors. And once again, he was advocating for the worldview of the gods, like the Arab Egypt. So there is this kind of reoccurring theme of turning the bad guys into the good guy. And it's not that God wants to hold anything back from us, but he has to prepare us and then initiate us into all kinds of knowledge that it's our inheritance to know it all. But these guys are coming in and perverting and sowing seeds into it. But that's where it could be going. They've created the worldview for us of the universe. They have reinvented themselves as aliens in that worldview, and now they're preparing to reinvent the second coming of God and his angels to rally the world. And that's what the weaponizing of space, and that's what all this technology that they're giving us is, so that we can stand on the day of the war of angels, on that cosmic war that's coming. Now, this totally alters our understanding of the world of angels than what we have received traditionally from the tradition. But when you look into what we have received traditionally, I realized that actually figuring out angels hasn't been a top priority for the past 2,000 years. Christians have had other things to focus on. And frankly, there's not a lot of information about them in the Bible as far as their nature, the kind of world they come from. It's more like they do specific tasks, whether it's the 5,000 Assyrians that are destroyed, or Sodom and Gomorrah that's destroyed, or, the ones that cater to the Messiah, that roll over his tomb and take care of Daniel's friends. And we see them do tasks, but what is the nature of their world? How do they operate? Are they born eternal? Is there each angel? There's only one of them. Do they come from a planet like us that had a history?
That's a whole nother episode right there. Yeah.
But today, God is slowly starting to remove the veil. Because the world of angels and the world of man is colliding. We have entered in that moment of history. Like you said, the rock that came, it began the process of transformation, but it's a 2,000-year process. That rock hitting the stuff, it's been kind of changing the world, but it has a climax, because in the Hebrew prophetic poetry, prophecies pattern. And we think of it in the Greek thinking, where every prophecy has a specific fulfillment. But in the Bible, prophecies pattern. it speaks about the circumstances of the prophet's life, actually. To prophecy means to bring the word of God to man. It doesn't mean to tell the future. And so, the prophet speaks about the conditions of the circumstances of his own life, and then speaks a pattern into creation that will have manifestations in history, like the horns of the shofar. It turns and twists through time, and eventually comes to a climactic fulfillment.
Right.
That's how this is designed. So yes, already the kingdoms of the world are already receiving the strike of the pebble, but it is really at the end, the climax of it comes when he and his angels come, and they really destroy the kings, and the empires collapse. They haven't yet.
Amen, but they will. I definitely agree with that. Mav, do you got a final thought, final question before we get into the info real quick?
This, I have one that's probably a whole episode in itself, but I think sometimes a lot of the concepts and theories that we talk about, they're very separated. They happened thousands of years ago, or they're secret societies I'll never see, you could think the ramifications are going to be in the far future. But there was something that you said concerning the first lie in the garden. So, education that you aren't ready for. You had mentioned something like that. So, and that tends to lead to destruction, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't that God was trying to keep back good and evil. It's he wanted to do it in the context of his relationship. If I could expand on that a little bit. So a lot of people think this doesn't affect them, but do you think the education system today and the things that are being added to the education system today is a way that is how it's entering into this next generation, into our children in the education system receiving knowledge they're not ready for to lead them to destruction?
Ooh.
And is it a concerted plan?
Yeah, for sure. In the secular world, especially in the United States, where the Holy Spirit was strong, these guys did infiltrate the education system. There's professors that belong to these secret societies. A lot of these secret societies, the oldest one was attached to Harvard University. They're always attached to universities. Like they have actually a spot, and people who go to these universities also go to these secret societies, and some of them become professors, some of them become congressmen, some become senators, some become presidents. So definitely there is this kind of brainwashing of these bodies of knowledge being put into the school system to counter, I guess, the church and the knowledge that comes from the Word of God, and to push that back. And as more and more they kind of capture your heart and mind, and you believe that, of course, your professors are right, you're essentially indoctrinated into a world view that is conducive to the implementation of their empire and the altering of reality. And this happens through the Republic's school system. It's a battle. As long as we have the right to free speech, we can continue to persuade people by teaching them the Word of God. And in that way, we push back. And that's why with the political correctness movement that started in the mid and end of 1990s, and I was there, I saw how the world was altered of religious discourse because I was involved in it, and suddenly everything changed on us. It was fascinating. The idea was you could challenge anything. You see, like let's say if you were in up to the middle of 1990s, the way it worked is that people of different religions agreed that to that person their beliefs were sacred, but what was not sacred was the complete challenging of those beliefs. You could turn around to a Muslim cleric or person and say some very, pointed things against Islam. He could then turn around and say some pointed things about Jesus to you. And that was accepted public discourse because the idea was we're trying to poke at each other to understand better these mysteries and also each other. And also it was a way of venting. You didn't go to war because you could talk. And then you could go and have a coffee afterwards. It wasn't personal. The culture allowed for this conversation. It was serious. So you were able to throw things at each other, but ultimately it wasn't meant to be understood as being personal. With political correctness, a new age came where already packaged ideas had to be accepted as true. You already had to understand each religion in a certain way, and if you went outside of that, you were a violent, destructive individual to the culture.
Yeah,
So
you're a
the
bully.
Bible is put in a corner. You can only have certain interpretations of it. You can talk, you have free speech, but not really. So they're coming at us. They're going to corner us more and more so that we can't really get the information out. You'll be a terrorist if you speak against the Antichrist.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
And
that sounds like the it's what we talked about on another episode, the ideology being this weapon. So it sounds like it's part of the same program. This lie from the beginning, it is leading into this, and there's that Hydra tentacle that is connecting these different pieces. So what you talked about today, and what we've talked about ideology, it is feeling like it's from that same piece.
Absolutely. I had all these questions, and I kid you not, Ali, you're the only guest I've had on multiple times where I have all these questions ready, written down, and you just answer them almost like you answered question 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like organically. And I was like, dude, I don't even got to ask the question. He's just going on and he's answering every single question I got. So it's like,
I'm sorry that if I'm just talking and
no.
I want you guys.
No, it's good. It's good. I just stop you sometimes just because there's certain thoughts I want to get into, and that's other than that, it's literally answering all my questions.
It's flowing.
Yeah, but well, one more thing I was going to say. Well, actually, we'll say this right now after the music. So, folks, stick with us. Listen to these dope tunes as always, and we'll be right back with all of Ali's information and any final thought, and we will land this plane.